How's it going? Let's talk about weapon types in Ravendawn. This is a topic that a lot of players are confused about and can't really find a good resource of information regarding this topic. I think it's pretty important when it comes to deciding what weapon types you would like to use for your character and for your build. And also because it is a bit of an investment, especially towards the mid to late portion of the game, right? So, before we can understand the differences between weapon types, we need to understand something first, which is there are two types of damage in the game, regardless of what archetype or class you are playing. You will be doing either spell damage or weapon damage. As you can see here from my character attributes on the character sheets, we have spell power and weapon power. And all of your abilities will either do one type of damage or the other, right? So currently I have Blood Thrall as my class, which uses Warfare, Protection, and Witchcraft as the three archetype. And you can see here from Witchcraft, the Curse ability deals 61 spell damage, as denoted by the purple text, versus Protection, which does 144 weapon damage, as denoted by the red text, right? So that makes sense. Well, why do we need to understand this? And this is because as a character in Ravendawn, you can equip any weapon types regardless of what archetype or class you are playing. And if we look at an item here, we'll see that every single weapon in the game will have a base stat, or what I would like to call an implicit stat, meaning regardless of what happens in the crafting process, you're almost always guaranteed to have this, right? As long as it's a T5 sword, you're going to have 8 attack. Now, this stat here will affect both your spell power and your weapon power. Okay, so for example, currently I'm equipping a bow, so I'm going to take this off, and you'll see that my spell power and weapon power, actually I'm going to take off everything else, just so that it does not affect my stat. So there you go. I effectively have 0 bonus stat from equipments, right? So my spell power is at 98 and my weapon power is at 99. Now if I equip the bow and give it a second to update, you'll see now both my spell power and weapon power receives an increase in plus 30, right? And this is the R total on the right hand side here. And the same applies to our abilities because again, it scales with our spell power and weapon power, right? So if I unequip the bow, you'll see that Curse is at 44 spell damage, and Bash is at 99 weapon damage. If I equip it, I believe Bash is going to receive a bit of a bonus in terms of weapon damage, because the bow has Might as part of its stats. But you'll see that both Bash has increased weapon damage now, as well as Curse, right? From the Witchcraft tree. So, okay, so why is this important? The reason for this is because if you would like to, you can play a spellcaster build and equip any weapon, right? For example, a sword, dagger, axe, whatever it is that you so choose, and your abilities will still scale the same amount as if you were wielding a staff or a scepter of the same tier, you know, all else being equal, effectively. The only difference between the different weapon types, effectively, has to do with your auto attack, right? So the attack that your character just do automatically without you having to press any buttons. So, for example, all of the melee items in the game, with one exception, which I'll touch on in a little bit, will scale with your character's weapon power, right? So this includes things like swords, axes, mace, hammer, and dagger. All of these will scale with weapon power. So that means if I want to play a spellcasting build, witchcraft, wizardry, you know, spiritual, holy, all that good stuff, and I decide to use a dagger, my abilities will still do an increased amount of damage from the dagger's implicit stat, from the dagger's attack stat, right? But my auto attack will suffer because I will most likely going to be scaling intelligence, and I will most likely be doing spell power, right? I'll have like a really high spell power, and my weapon power will be shit. And the weapons scales, the daggers scales its auto attack off of weapon power. So effectively, my auto attack will be scratching the mobs, for example, the target. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is this rule does not apply to the light blade, which is the only exception. The light blade will scale adaptively to whatever is the highest between the two, spell power or weapon power, in your character. So at the moment, for example, I have 128 spell power and 135 weapon power. So if I have a light blade, its auto attack will scale with weapon power, right? That's the only exception throughout the entire game. Everything else that are non-melee, with the exception of the bow, will scale with spell damage. So scepter, staff, spell damage for auto attack. Everything else effectively will scale with weapon power. Cool? Cool. Oh, one more thing. Melee weapons provide a slightly higher attack power than range. And this stat here, the implicit attack stat, is doubled for two-handed weapons. Makes sense, right? Because for a single-handed weapon, you could dual wield. You could have a single-handed weapon with a shield. Same sort of thing. I'll touch on shield for just a little bit, because the interesting thing with shield is that its stats will dynamically change based off of the main hand weapon. So I'm going to bring up the dev blog post here. Type in shield, and there we go. So we'll zoom in a little bit. Effectively, shields provide additional defense power and bonus attack power to the wielder, and at times additional healing power based on the main hand weapon use when also using a shield, right? So if you have a non-healing weapon like a single-handed axe, dagger, sword, then your shield will have 80% attack power and 20% defense power, right? So if the shield stats are 10 point, let's say, you'll have 80 attack, 2 defense. If you have a healing weapon, scepter or mace, your shield will have 70 attack power, 20 defense, and 20 healing power. So there it is. The last thing, and this is more important for crafters, and if you're playing something that's like a solo self-found, you want to try to find your own equipments and resources and try to craft it yourself, is that there is a weighted attribute rolling. So let's go back to the game and touch on this a little bit. So besides the implicit stat that's rolled on the weapon, on the equipment, right? So in this case here, it is the attack. You're going to get that regardless. Everything else is random when the item is being crafted, right? So for example here, this item has two, because it's a tier 5, it has 2 primary attributes, the 2 orange stat line there, +1 dexterity and +1 wisdom, and 2 secondary attributes, +5 max health and +1 regeneration. These are all determined by random at the moment of crafting this item. However, there is a weighted chance, a higher chance of the swords rolling intelligence, for example, right? And so you can see it here. One-handed and two-handed axes, higher chance of rolling might. One-handed and two-handed clubs, higher chance of rolling wisdom. Swords, intelligence. Daggers and light blades are dexterity. Bow, dexterity. Staves and scepters, intelligence. And shields, wisdom. So effectively what this means is if you're solo self-found, or if you're a crafter, and this also has to do with how you price your things in the market, right? If you, for whatever reason, have, I don't know, staffs and scepter that rolls might, not that many people would want to play it, but it's rarer to find, right? So that's, you can take that in mind when you're crafting an item, and try to go for the whatever is the primary stats for your build. The last thing that I wanted to touch on is how these different stats will scale with the item's infusion. So in the game, each item has up to, I believe, 9 grades, and you can upgrade these items through Infusion. And so we can open the Infusion menu here. And I bought this hoping to use it, but I realized that it requires legacy level 55. So at the beginning of the video, I did say that your character can equip any weapon type. The only restriction is the legacy level requirements. And I found this out because of this mistake. But to demonstrate what stats scale with Infusion, you can just drag this in here. And for example, if I want to infuse my existing bow, my T3 existing bow with this new T5 sword, you'll see that these are the stats that will scale, right, with Infusion. So effectively the implicit that I was talking about before, the attack here, the 2 primary dexterity and wisdom, right? And then the 2 secondary maximum health and health regen. Okay? So it's important that when we choose an item or when we craft an item, we try to, choose the equipment piece that has the primary and secondary attributes that is relevant to our build. If you're doing weapon damage, it would be might and weapon damage. If you're doing spell damage, it would be intelligence and spell damage, respectively. Now, the last thing when it comes to stats on equipment are these purple stats, right? So I'm not sure what the exact name for them are. Let's just call them, I don't know, explicits, right? These are randomly crafted onto the item at the moment of creating it, but it's determined by these quality crystals. Right, so for example, when we're crafting something, we'll see that quality bar at the very bottom that we can try to fill to 100%. And each time we fill that quality bar, it adds another crystal into the item. And effectively, that means that it's another purple line of stats that's added to the item. This, however, does not scale with Infusion. So these are like nice to haves, but not the primary stat that we want for the build, effectively. So yeah, I hope that's everything. If I forget something, I'll add that in later somewhere. I don't know. Anyway, streaming on Twitch, 9 to midnight every night, Eastern Standard Time. So that's like New York, Montreal time zone. Yeah, come hang out. Bye.